Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justin the Food Entrepreneur Show. I'm Justin Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's Bizzarro. For anyone who's out there, you can find us on Instagram at Justin the Food Entrepreneurs or at Justin Bizzarro. Again, that's two Z's, two R's. You can also find us now on Gorilla Brave. That is our growing community for entrepreneurs, and specifically in the food, beverage, farming, hospitality, nutrition, and hospitality space. That's generally where we sit. Beverage, alcohol, those areas, that's where the expertise are. That's where most of the information that we are putting in there, who it's pointed towards, especially towards the younger entrepreneurs right now trying to figure out how to make it in the business or build businesses. There's a lot of the low-hanging fruit information in there to help you guys get started. We will continue to populate that for you guys. So I have Anthony Hart with us today. How are you doing today, Anthony?
Good, bro. Excited to be on.
Yeah, I can't even do justice to your story, even though I've heard bits and pieces of your testimony for sure. Definitely over the last year as I've been around you a lot. So talk to me about your story, your venture, who you are, what you do, and what has sort of gotten to you at the point today. And I'll ask questions in between, but I just want to hear your story because I haven't heard the whole thing and I'm fascinated.
Yeah, bro. A lot of people, especially at this point, you get a podcast or you sit down with somebody, everybody wants to know your journey, your story, where you've been. Everybody's got a bio. And as we previously discussed,
Yeah.
what titles and things like that.
Yeah.
I'll start mine off with I think the most profound and most meaningful. I'm a husband and I'm a father to three patient, cultivating kids. My journey, it's been a crazy one. I'm a pastor's kid, grew up in pastor's home, and felt like I was going to be a pastor very early in my life. And then just along the way, I don't know, something derailed that, changed that, and I didn't understand at the time. So at 18, when I graduated from high school, I had a full paid scholarship to Arkansas State University. I'm from Arkansas originally. And my buddy talked me into joining the Navy. So he had just watched Top Gun at that time. And I don't know if it was the jets or the dudes in cutoff jean shorts that attracted him into the Navy. I always joke him about that.
Yeah.
But he talked me into joining the Navy and I said, okay. And, I did that at the time with the prospect of what it offered. It took me a lot of years to realize that I was running from something. And I think, you've heard me say this before in some of our calls, is I think that's the trouble with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people in general, is if we don't stop to take notice of what's directing our trajectory. We could be running from a lot of things and never run to anything. You'll never be assured of where you're going. You're just okay with running away from something. And it could be brokenness, hurt, or everything in between. For me, I kind of saw hurt in the name of the church. I saw, my dad being a person who devoted his whole life to the church, be hurt by it. I saw people who made mistakes get wounded and hurt by the church. And realistically, I didn't want any part of that. So I tried to forge my own path and join the Navy, which would lead to a lot of open opportunities. I met my wife through that. Eventually would end up in the church. We ended up in that and did 21 years as in the Navy as a nuclear engineer. So along that journey, when you think you got it figured out and you're moving in a direction.
Well, so you're also kind of a scientist in some ways, correct?
A little bit. Yeah. I have that's kind of the way I'm wired, physics and math, and which is fun when you're trying to figure out faith.
Yeah, I was going to say that you just added a complication there. I know what adding those complications can be like sometimes, but
very much so. Yeah. So, along the way, get married. Neither one of us, although I'd been born and raised in church. My wife had got saved later in life and as a teenager. And then in that moment we met in a nightclub where neither one of us were doing what we were supposed to do, where we were supposed to be doing it. So we got married, and our first year of marriage was hell because we were carrying in a lot of baggage, insecurities, brokenness, all the things. And we realized we had to change our trajectory. And find the right group of people to do life with. So we realized getting back into a good church was a good space to do it in. So we searched and found a church and got involved, got connected, got plugged in with a group of people who were genuinely building people up, which is a beautiful aspect that I saw over the course of the years we were there. And during that time frame, my pastor called me in his office one day and he said, "Have you ever felt the call to preach?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I've ran from it for a long time." And he said, "Yeah, God told me to tell you to stop running." And I was like, okay. So I had about 7 years left before I would retire at that time. So I began to get into ministry, actively involved, got licensed and ordained through our church. And over the course of that next 6 to 7 years in the Navy, became the campus pastor at the church while also being active duty. So that really helped forge my path of what I was doing. You know, most people say when they're in the military, they ask when you're going to retire. And most people say when I realize what I want to do when I grow up. And along the way, yeah, because, you know, the military is such I don't know, it's a focus thing. And a lot of the stuff you do there doesn't necessarily carry over. You know, for me, it did. I could have got out and worked at a civilian power plant or something like that. But I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I was called to do. But the course of those 21 years, getting away from church, getting away from all that really opened me up to the thought process. And, you know, maybe it's because of, you know, that scientific thinking you talked about earlier. I looked back over the course of my life. I looked at church as a whole and I said, I don't think we do a good job of helping people make the Bible practical. Like, we can read these stories and read these things and yeah, we're supposed to be better, but what do we do with this on a day-to-day basis? Like, that's really what the desire of the Bible is. And you talk about Jesus and what he came to do, it's to get us to act differently. So I began to do that over the course of my time in the Navy. How do I apply this, you know, to guys and gals that I meet day in and day out, and conversation and just sharing space and listening, the most important thing, I believe. So that was kind of the key for me in the midst of all of this. You know, even I struggled during that time of the day, like, man, did I wreck my opportunity? You know, should I have been doing this longer? And it was kind of like God saying, nope, you thought you had control, but I'm using all the doing and undoing in your life to get you to a place to really see this through a different lens.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That is how he works. And it's not an outside job. He doesn't go fixing the outside of our lives. It's an inside job. He works on the inside of us, so we change our world around us.
Yes, which is amazing, right? Our focus generally is what we can see. We love to control what we can see. We can't control what we can't. So we just focus on the visible. And I had an amazing story while we were at this church through the course of years. We had an organization come to us and they said, would it be okay if we stored an old city bus behind your church? We're going to outfit it and do something we're preparing it to be a doctor's office so we can take it down to third world countries and just drive it through the countries and take care of people and offer services. So we're like, man, yeah, that'd be amazing. So they parked it in the back, and over the course of months, I remember I would leave by the back sometimes and I would look at it, and from the outside, it looked like it never changed. I'd see them working on it, but it still looked like the same old bus. And then one week they're like, hey, would we be able to park this out front this week and show it off to your church, kind of see what we're doing? And in my mind, kind of what we were just talking about, I'm thinking, sure, I guess if you want them to see a half-done project, but when are you going to work on the outside? When are you going to make this thing look nice? But I didn't say that. I said, sure, that'd be fine. So that Sunday, I get there and it's out front, and I go up. I'm going to jump in here and look at this, and I walk in on this ugly on the outside bus. I walk into this pristine, white, beautiful office space with a doctor's, a bed where they can lay and all the things. Like, it looks like you're walking into what a doctor's office or a hospital would look like. And you could eat off the floor. And instantly, like, inside me, it was like God said, don't ever judge what I'm doing on the inside of somebody based on what you can see on the outside.
Yeah, maybe they need to be incognito down there in those countries. Who knows?
Yes. But it changed my perception of how God does things. Because, I've been raised in church, and you can go around. That's where gossip's generally built, or like we'd look at people and like, ooh, what is going on in their life? Like, you need to fix this, this, and this, instead of realizing that sometimes those symptoms that we can see aren't even the problem. Like, it's the result of something down deeper that needs to be affected or changed first. Like, think about from a business perspective, right? We can walk in and not understand somebody's business and look at things like, you need to fix that. But when you can really get in depth on what they're doing and why they're doing it, you'll realize that maybe the thing that you noticed isn't even the problem. It's just a symptom of the problem. But that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen instantaneous. It's the intimate connection with what they're doing, why they do that. You can say, you know what, here's actually the problem. We could have fixed this, but it won't ever change this. So eventually that or something else will arise again. Let's get to the heart of what the problem is, because when you fix that, all these other things will begin to fix themselves.
Spent a long time in this area in business, just trying to maximize employees or how to untap potential and growing people and all that. One of the things I will say, it's interesting to me, is and just filtering it through it and leading, and especially leading ourselves, is everything weirdly filters down to, the 7 deadly sins in some way, shape, or form. That's something that I found is true, and that's truth with the capital T. And it's so crazy as an entrepreneur or a leader when you can see those patterns and what the underlying things are. It's a difference in the way that you lead and your ability to lead. Can you save them? No, that's God's job. But can you help God in his job? Yes. What does that look like? It depends on the situation. And so let's continue this conversation a little bit. You're realizing that this is your calling. Like, how do you bridge the gap we just talked about?
Well,
it's a big gap as a pastor when you're the shepherd of sheep, right? Or your flock.
One of the things that I had to realize along the way, and this was the hardest thing in ministry or generally life, especially being a husband and a father and all the things, is I can't change somebody and I can't save somebody. I realized I carried a lot of that burden for a lot of years, but it was the most freeing moment to realize, like you said, that's God's job. So it's my job to position myself to help somebody see the need for it, maybe present them an opportunity to an area they can grow or change in, and then walk that journey out with them. Like, that's the key. And then I realized the only way I could do that was not to stand on a pedestal and like say, I have it all figured out, you need to do this. It was sharing my own story and sharing the moments that I'd failed, sharing the moments that I'd fallen short, sharing the moments that I'd realized something in me had to shift and change. The invitation came in my ability to do it in my own life. And I think that's where a lot of us, we can get stuck, when we deem successful by the world, look at all they're doing. And then that successful person tells somebody who's struggling, this is what you have to do. And then we get stuck in this comparison mode. But it's when we realize that, what, we didn't get here overnight and we can't expect somebody else to. The journey is to grab them by the hand and say, man, I believe in you where you're at, and just take a step at a time and figure that out. So like you're talking with your employees, like when you begin to do that on a daily basis, begin to see things in them that they can't see. That's what Jesus did. That is discipleship 101, which is not a word we use in business, but is one we should use more. So when it comes to like leading a flock, I had to realize along the way that I was being led.
Absolutely.
Like I couldn't give somebody that I hadn't anything that I had not received. So it really, and that's not a lesson that I learned easily. We've talked a little bit about that on our Warriors for Christ call. And it's something that I'd have to be daily reminded of because, there's that pride that comes in when we accomplish something, the words of people, oh, look at all you've done. But it is in that moment of realizing, you know what? I didn't get here by myself. I didn't get here very easily. I didn't get here perfectly. I arrived at this place broken and messed up, making better steps every day, but not doing it to maybe the level I should have, not doing it to the timeliness I should have, not always getting it right, but I'm here. So it's in that place. If I'm here leading a business, if I'm here leading a church, if I'm here leading a family, all those are just as important. As a leader, as a Christian leader, then I have to understand that it's not about me leading, it's about me being led. Because if I'm following him, then people aren't following me that I'm leading, they're actually following him.
And it's crazy because it'll bend the human mind, but it's in the realization that it's outside our understanding, but there is so much truth in it when we truly lead wanting others to grow or even outgrow us, or have them lead so much so that they outlead us. What happens is we're also allowing God to lead through us in those ways. And if we put God and allow God to lead us and then teach them how to do the same thing, then that becomes a powerful relationship for them in their business, in their lives, in whatever. I think that that's part of having sound Christianity and living by it. And it's a difference between saying it, vocalizing it, what I'll call, marketing it, versus actually living by it. And the living by it is the attractive part, I think. And that's part of what we're talking about. Our stories are real life things, and they're not the glorious parts. Usually they're the darkest parts that people can relate to. And that's powerful.
In business, a lot of people, you hear this concept a lot, always be selling. And the bad parts of our stories don't sell. So it's in that limited understanding. Like, if I'm always selling, then I'm always trying to give you something that's going to make you agree, buy into whatever I'm doing or whatever it may be. But I've arrived at this place that I think that's a broken model. Is if you're really doing it the right way, not just saying it, because if you're always selling, you're generally doing that with your mouth. So you're trying to talk somebody into buy whatever you're selling. But if you're really living it out, you don't ever have to sell yourself. It will already occur. There's going to be people who have watched you, experienced you, interacted with you, that are going to sell you before you ever walk into the room. Like, when you're doing business the right way, when you're living life the right way, when you go in to walk down a set-in with a person and try to, bridge that business gap to do business with for whatever it may be, if you're doing it right, they're going to understand before you ever walk in that you're doing it differently, that you're open to walk in, because Christian business looks very different than the rest of the business around it. There's just a genuine feel to it, a connection. And you'll even get to a place where I'm not worried about the sell anymore, because if I don't sell, I hope I made an impact on this person beyond that. I hope I shared something with them that challenges them to be a better husband, father, wife, mother, whatever it may be, because at the end of the day, that's got to be the most important thing.
Let's talk about your journey, because I think it's important to understand how God arms us and gives us armor. He gives us both weapons and protection, both through the Bible and through skills and stuff we stack. So let's talk about the years in the Navy. While we talked about the career path would have been a nuclear power plant probably, or something nuclear related, there are skills that you learn there that have become essential. The discipline maybe in the Navy is part of it. I don't know. I'm guessing has become all part of what it is that you're doing now. Talk to me about how one has impacted the other.
Yeah. Like I said, there was almost a sense of shame that I'd taken this different path. And I struggled with that for a lot of years, that I am not good enough, or because I didn't do this like every other pastor, that I'm not prepared to be a pastor. I'm going to have to earn it all back. But it was through those years when I really stop and take notice now. I'm very wired differently. I love my pops to death, but he and I are wired very differently when it comes to pastors. And I look at my time in the Navy, and it definitely led to it. A couple examples are, I was raised in a small backwoods country town. So in our church environment, you sat at tables with people who looked like you, acted like you, sounded like you. And it's easy to keep in that groupthink mindset. It's easy to not be challenged beyond what you know and your own understanding, and not be able to see people who are different than you. The Navy wrecked that. So I was from a small backwood Arkansas town. There was zero, well, I won't say zero. There was only one black family in our hometown. And it's funny, but their last name was White. So I grew up around a lot of white people. And I can remember, things like in church, I talked about there was hurt and pain. I couldn't put my finger at that point, but I remember hearing white pastors tell racist jokes. That was the currency of laughter in a space that didn't affect people of other cultures. They weren't there, so you laugh, haha, and you move on. But when I joined the Navy, because in my home, the value of people as a whole had been demonstrated my parents. My first two friends in the Navy were a black guy from Chicago and a Puerto Rican from New York. And then there's this white boy from backwoods Arkansas. It's really funny to watch it. But I begin to see people of all walks. I begin to walk with people of all walks. As a sailor and then a chief, I begin to lead people of all walks. So it helped me to communicate to people who didn't look like me, act like me, sound like me, which required listening. It helped me to realize that the most important pursuit that I need in my life is perspective, because it's something I'll never have enough of. I need to listen to people's stories. This goes even to while I was in ministry just not long ago. You remember when the Black Lives Matter movement really began to pick up. I realized I didn't have a lot of perspective on this. And a guy who was serving in ministry with us at the church we were at that time, very close friend of mine now, I walked in his office and I said, bro, I need to see the world through your eyes because I don't understand it. And he began to share and open up about stories he had experienced. I began to get perspective on his own life. And, maybe a year later, we went home to Arkansas, brought him and his family with me. They were black. We went and did ministry in my dad's church. Well, afterwards, we went out to eat at a McDonald's because that's what you do in backwoods Arkansas after church on Sundays. And my dad introduced me and him to another local pastor who was in there. That man shook my hand and he wouldn't even look at my friend. And I would have missed it if I didn't have that perspective. So I think the most valuable thing I learned in the Navy was I had to get uncomfortable. I had to get around people who were different than me. I had to listen to people's stories in order to assist and help or in order to activate them.
Yeah, I think the listening is a big part. I think it's a big part of Christianity as well. I think there's a lot more listening than we give credit for in Christ in the stories, because you try to fill writing with words. So there's such moments of silence I don't think we account for, but we do know existed through both the Bible and through other contexts.
Yeah.
And so,
with that, think about what the most important thing Jesus did was ask questions. He didn't just ask questions to ask questions. He waited for a response. So he was listening. And then it's in that moment of listening, he connected truth with where they were. It's a very powerful tool when you can listen where they're at instead of try to tell them what you have, try to tell them where they need to be. And you really just give them something where they're at that helps them begin to walk away from that brokenness.
Yeah, there's a whole, get into it another time, but I think there's a whole customer service, hospitality way of life that will benefit businesses when you treat humans with that perspective. Even the customer coming at you, mess up, whatever, obviously there's making amends as a business. There's also trying to make their day a better day. That's your responsibility. And and that's okay. So how do we do that? Well, the only way to do it is listen, really. Because if you try to solve their problem before you know what it is, or you jump to it because you see a symptom, as we discussed earlier, you're just digging a bigger hole for yourself and for them.
Yeah. And actually what you're doing in that process is undervaluing that person. You're putting more value on yourself and your assessment than them. You're not inviting them into that space. And we have to be careful that, because we do that even in our most intimate of relationships with our kids, with our spouse, with all the things. And it goes back, I use this scripture quite often. And I think it's one as Christians, we need to lean more in. The book of Proverbs, even if you're not a Christian, it's one that you can find wisdom in. Solomon, the writer of most of this book, the story is God told him he could have anything, and he didn't ask for riches, power, authority, anything. He said, I just want wisdom. So when you see this book, a lot of the things that have been said, we read this in our Warriors for Christ group a year ago, I think. And as we were going through it, it's amazing how many business owners had heard a lot of these concepts in just basic every day, because there's so much wisdom in it. But Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. And I think that's when you're trying to incorporate faith into your business, if you're a Christian, you should just act differently. You should live differently. You shouldn't have to talk anybody into something. It just carries the way you do business in life as a whole. And it is not in trusting in what you know, but it is leaning into his understanding. So when you ask those questions, what you're doing is you're not putting value on the things you know, the things you've done. You're trusting, man, I want to learn something else. I want to know something else that's going to challenge me beyond where I've arrived.
I love it. Let's continue the journey here a little bit. Like, you go from the secular world into the spiritual world, for lack of a better term, and now you're trying to connect, make sure there's more consistency and what I would say coherency between both. Like, there shouldn't be no reason there's a separation, or we call them two separate things. That's a mind-boggling thing to me. But we do. But that is sort of your, I don't want to say job, but it is your calling and what you're doing now. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, how, because not everyone is a theologian. I'm sorry, that's not, I don't want to say it that way. I want to say everyone is a theologian, just not everyone goes to the depths of the education or has a calling to go to a deeper theological level. Let me put it that way, because anyone who has a relationship with God is a theologian. Let's start there. But talk to me about, like, how do you then start learning this, what I'll call almost translation, diving into the Bible, diving into the works that are need to be done? You obviously grew up in it, but your perspective has changed a little bit, so you're filtering it a little bit. How do you go about now building this new, I don't even know how to describe it, but I'll just use it. I'm going to an extreme, but in some ways, God gives us the design. We still have to build the ark.
Yeah. The hardest lesson I had to learn was not in the doing, but the undoing. So I told you I was born and raised in church, did all these things. And we got into church, active in ministry. And the year I retired, God really challenged my wife and I to do something different. The church we were at had offered me a full-time position, the exact dollar amount that would fill in the gap between my active duty and retired pay. And right before that all happened, our staff at the church was going to a conference, and Morgan and I, my wife, were not going to be able to go. Just the stars had not aligned. Everything was going wrong. At the last minute, a babysitter fell into place. All the things fell into place, so we were able to go. It was really one of those moments I said, okay, God, you got me here. I'm listening. So the first day we're in the conference, and they're just kind of playing some music at the beginning, and just kind of in my own headspace. I'm like, okay, God, you got me here. What do you want me to get out of this? You aligned all of this. So here I am. And I flipped open the Bible, and it was to the story in Acts where the Apostle Paul, before he was Paul, is Saul, and he's walking down the road, and he's blinded by this light, which ends up being Jesus, and there were scales put on his eyes. And as I'm reading that, I just kind of felt in my own spirit that God was saying, the scales were on his eyes spiritually before they were ever there physically. In other words, when the scales came physically on his eyes, this was just an example of what was already there. And I wrote that down in my notes. So the first pastor, the lead pastor of this conference, gets up and he preaches. And afterwards, they're playing music, and he's kind of just a prayer and reflecting on what he was preaching. He's like, I feel this all of a sudden. He said, I feel like God's telling us to do this. He said, I want everybody in the church to put your hands on your eyes and ask for him to remove the scales. And I'm like, okay. I showed the note to my wife that I'd written at the beginning before he ever got on the stage. And really, I said, okay, God, you got my attention. I'm listening. What are we going to do? And over the course of that 3 days, he just kept saying to me, it's time to do something different. So we get in the car on the way home, and I didn't know how I was going to tell my wife, because I'm turning down a job offer it's going to push us down in finances and all the things, stepping into this unknown. And I said, babe, I just don't feel like I'm supposed to take that position. I really feel like we're supposed to do something different. And she looks at me and she goes, I know, I've been waiting on you. Okay. A few minutes later, our friend who was at the concert was driving a separate car. She calls us and she goes, so when are we starting our church? And we'd had no conversation about this. So I'm like, okay, God, I'm listening. So we get home, and eventually over the course of months, transition out of the church we're in, and we started a home church. And We
Well,
really thought that was going to look
that's a total entrepreneur swing there. But in the terms of the church, it would be, I believe it's an apostle. That's something apostle would just suddenly turn right. Is that
yes,
true?
yes, it is. And that's a word that people have spoke over me time and time again. I'm like, I don't need to hear that. But it was a transition, like in that season, stepping out of the comfort of the everyday church, of what had been established, all these things. And then even in the home, like we really began to try to recreate what we had seen. We did a Facebook Live and we do the 3 songs in a sermon. And then there was a season in that where God was like, stop doing all that. And so then we just began to have dinner. We just began to share a table with people. We began to invite people in our home and sit on the couch and have conversations. And we realized the importance of those intimate spaces and how the corporate nature of the church has missed the intimate nature of the church. So I call that my undoing season, because I really had to lay down a lot of my religious mindsets or religious processes. I had got so trapped in the methods of church that I had missed the message.
Yeah,
So
I know exactly where to go on. This is
yeah,
important because I think this happens to a lot of us,
yes.
especially
So
when we're
when you
starting to get close to God in some ways. We start missing the forest amongst the tree in front of us.
yes, because we get lost in the comfort and security, especially here in America. You know, we can have a pretty tough life and it's still pretty comfortable in the span of things. And in church, we get trapped in the comfort and security of a weekly schedule. We go in an hour, hour and a half on Sunday, check the box, and we're good. Then we go right back into life and struggle all week. And we struggle enough to want to get back into church. So there's never this desire to be there just to get something. It's to help us make through the week. But it was in that season, man, I really, like, he became more real to me because it was sitting across a coffee table with somebody, and I couldn't prepare a sermon for that conversation. Like, I can prepare a sermon on Sunday. I kind of know the pulse of where we're at, and over the course of some weeks preach a sermon series or whatever it may be. But like this, when you're sitting in conversation with somebody, you cannot prepare a sermon from that unless you go back to what we talked about earlier. You're basing it on what you see, on the symptoms that you perceive. So there were so many times in just a conversation where I'm getting like these instant downloads that I'm okay. And I say it to a person, and like you just see the instant recognition. Like you see it's because you're now in the presence of a God who sees that person, and you're not trying to connect them to you or your sermon or your voice. You just want them to feel seen and heard and help them in their situation beyond your own understanding. So when I talk about that undoing, it really got me to a place of relationship, of the importance of a table, because what I found is in my pursuit while I was in that church before is that, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay.
perfectly. Yeah.
That my pursuit had been the stage. Like I wanted that ability to get up and speak, but it was in that moment of realizing, man, I don't want the stage anymore. I don't need that. This is what I want. I want to be present, one-on-one, two-on-one, whatever it may be, in conversation and building those moments. And that's when he removed my pursuit, my desire for titles, for the platform, for the stage, and really began to hone my heart on being present in the moment, which really lends back to when he, over the course, when he brought us back into a church, it changed how I pastor. It changed how I do the week to week. And now I see it as, I get to preach on Sunday, but I'm honored when I get to sit down with somebody, when I get to have that cup of coffee, when I get to help somebody through something in life. It's not the pursuit of the title anymore, but it's like me being a father. Everybody can call me dad, but I'm only really daddy to my kiddos. When they say it, it rings differently than anybody else in the world. And when you can walk through something with somebody and they call you pastor, it's not a title, it's a term of endearment. So, one of the things that really stands out during that time frame, even now, sitting on this podcast with you, what does a pastor have to say to entrepreneurs? I got invited to speak at a business conference during this span, during this time frame in our life. And as we were preparing, I said, I don't even know how to prepare for this. And I can remember sitting with a friend of ours that had invited me, and we were talking. She goes, how do we prepare for this? And a thought coming to my mind, and is this: you cannot prepare for what you've been prepared for.
Yeah, that is so true. That is like we need to say it again.
You cannot prepare for what you've been prepared for. And, for me, I prepare for a sermon, but I realized God had opened this door for me to go in this conference. And if he had opened it, then I had already been prepared for it. And like, it was just this peace that fell. I'm like, okay. So, bro, I like going to this conference. I prepared. I've been asked to speak on the last day, which is going to be a Sunday. And it was like a Christian business conference. So they'd asked me to preach. So I'd prepared a sermon for the last day. And then I get there and they're like, on the first day of the conference, they're like, hey, we want you to be on a panel and we're going to talk about how to incorporate faith into your business. Every question they ask, I preached my sermon that I'd prepared for the third day. I preached it all in the first 20 minutes of the conference. And I'm like, okay, God, I don't know where we're going now, but you got me here. So let's do it. And over the course of those 3 days, I began to watch businessmen and businesswomen who were operating in ministerial roles. Like, there was a dude I met who's on our call, Ryan Austin, amazing dude, had been an alcoholic for many years, who's now sober. Dude was in the word, learning and walking out his own faith. Many people in the church who had pastors and all the things would say, oh, he's very young in his faith. But what I saw was a man who was showing up every day at his work. He was cooking breakfast for his people. This is an asphalt business. He's going to the work site, cooking breakfast for his people. He's reading scripture and praying over his people. And I'm like, bro, you are operating in the role of a pastor, maybe better than some who carry the title. And God just really began to work in me, like, in the workforce, in the business world, there are Christians who are operating in the callings that are listed in the fivefold ministry. And
Yeah.
it changed my
Yeah.
whole perspective of church. And my desire was not to be in a building with a steeple, but it was really to begin to prepare and motivate the church people to go make a difference Monday through Saturday. And it was eye-opening to me. One of
Yeah,
the things
it's
that
great.
I just went completely blank. Billy Graham once said, he said, the next great revival will occur in the marketplace.
I agree with that 100%. I want to talk about this for 1 second. I took a class in seminary about leadership. And as a 44-year-old at the time when I took the class, I'm now 45. I've built companies and been a part of companies being built, all the things, family businesses, and having leadership really ingrained in me in certain ways, graduate school, undergraduate, secular world. And I'm just going to use that word temporarily because I don't believe we should be using spiritual or secular as separate words. I think we need to understand that they are one and the same, but that's a whole other topic. We as humans have created human constructs to keep us from a spiritual life. We created the word secular to keep us as a human construct in our mind from the spiritual world. I truly believe that. But leadership, it was interesting. It was in many ways, the class was easy because I could do it and I wasn't challenged. But in other ways, it was extremely challenging because it deconstructed a lot of leadership beliefs and things that have been put in by the outside world that were not truth with a capital T. And why do I say this? And why am I adding this to the conversation? Because the same leadership struggles a pastor is actually going through is the same one as an entrepreneur. And I attached apostle to entrepreneur because there's a lot of similarities in these 5 things we just sort of touched on. We didn't get into everyone individually. APES test is my way I sort of attached them all because I can see how our calling from God and the seeds planted actually overlap our trajectory in life. And why do I not want the words to be separate? Because inside, if I'm allowing the Holy Spirit to fill my jar, it's the inside that changes the outside world. My individual relationship, not my judgment of someone else, whether or not someone else is doing what their jar is filled with properly or not. Is it filled with good things or the Holy Spirit? I don't know. But the thing is it's not for me to worry about. The only way I can change them truly is by allowing God to act through me. But how do I do that? Well, I just have a relationship with God and allow him to outdo him and I gain my wisdom from him. And you said wisdom earlier. I think that that's a powerful word also. I think wisdom is relative to the amount of time you're willing to spend with God or in wisdom or seeking wisdom. Those things all kind of correlate together because a relationship with God, by the nature of it, when you're truly changing yourself, your own mind, your own actions, your own reactions, especially reactions, because the world happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Wisdom is not lessons learned. Wisdom is lessons lived.
Yeah. So let's talk about sort of reflect on some of the things I said, because I do feel that, the same temptation, the same spiritual warfare that a pastor is going through for leading his flock is the same thing an entrepreneur may go through. And we don't realize it in how to equip ourselves and stuff like that in certain ways. And I know each journey's different. There's not a blanket way, but I just want to sort of talk about that because one of the reasons I enjoy listening so much on our calls is some of the stuff you touch into. And just for the audience, I want to touch upon this too. Like, I've really started listening more. I've always been pretty good at it and intent with it because I know it's really good for business and relationships, but there's a difference when you filter it through the wisdom that we're talking about. So I just want to anchor that. Anyway, go ahead. Passing the mic back to you, Anthony.
I've been preaching a sermon series on the I am statements that Jesus says in the book of John. And one of them is, I am the light of the world. Now, in order to hear that statement, you have to understand that he is the light, and who's he for? The world. So like you said, we split up the spiritual and the secular. We want to isolate the world off to itself. That's the non-church and this is the church. We do our best to silo it off. But the whole reason Jesus came was to tear down that wall. That's what had to happen. The nation of Israel was God's people, children of Israel. They had become isolated, and he had done his best. We see in the book of Jeremiah, they'd been in captivity, and he didn't tell them to isolate yourself. He said, actually go get jobs, take wives. He said, be a blessing to even the nation that's got you in captivity. So throughout scripture, we're challenged to be different in the world we're in. So when you think about that, I am the light of the world, then Jesus makes statements like, we are like a city set on a hill. A city that cannot be seen, right? The light that shines. And then he said, you don't take your light and put it under a basket, but rather you have the light that all in the house can see. So we see two very different sides of the coin here. First, it's the entirety of the world that we've been called to be seen by. Also, all of us within the house. So it paints two pictures of the church within the house. Those of us, what are we doing for the light to be seen amongst ourselves? Because if you can't see the light in the house, guess what? No one's going to see it outside of the house. So cultivating within us what the truth is, living that out amongst each other, helping one another, grow that. So then we walk into life every day, somebody takes notice of us. So one of the things that really stood out to me as I see social media, all the world around us, the church is really good at standing up and showing out. And one of the things God kind of crystallized in my spirit over the last couple of years is you don't need to stand up and show out. You need to show up and stand out. And I believe when you're doing that, it's in the house, it's out of the house. That's the light. So, I think that was really the challenge to me is I get to be in myself, in church, out of church, available at all times, tearing down the silos of my life to say, if I'm going to be this here and this here, no, he calls me to be the same in and out, wherever I'm at. So then the challenge, whether I'm in business, whether I'm in my home, whether I'm in the church, is I want you to experience me. My goods, my bads, wherever I'm at, the lessons I've learned, because I believe it's just as applicable in everything. The way I talk to people should be the way I talk to people in church and out of church. I'm trying my best to speak value over somebody because we live in a world where value has been depleted from people. We live in a place, we have an identity crisis in the world around us. What is our identity? Our identity is this. We're a product of what's been done to us, for us, and by us. So then think about it. Everybody in the world has a different story of what's been done to them. There's some people who have had some crazy things done to them, have had bad parents, have been, the worst of the worst, sexually molested all the way, broken relationships, physically abused, all the things. There's been a lot of bad things done to us. There's been a lot of good things done for us that does almost just as much damage. You think about the people that we have that are the trust fund kids that have been given everything in this life and don't know how to value anything because it's all been given to them. And then the third is what's been done by us. And that puts us in a whole nother space of forgiveness, right? Because we know that our mistakes and we're our worst enemy when it comes to giving forgiveness to somebody. We generally can't forgive ourselves. So when you see everybody struggling in those places, when we see, regardless of what your stories are, that's the places we struggle in. It goes back to one of the first initial statements I said is, are we running from something or are we running to something? So now, from that perspective, whether it's secular or spiritual, what are you running towards? Because a lot of people, you could have a bad example as a father. Well, I'm going to be a great father because my dad wasn't. Well, then are you running towards being a good father? Or are you just running away from being a bad father? Because then you could just be better than him and still not be good. You've settled at something less than. So it really changes your pursuit. And I think, when it comes for us as Christians, our pursuit has to be Christ. What he did, how he did, I think is the most important thing. We say a lot of things that Jesus said, but we don't live life the way he did. So it undervalues everything we say. That's that showing up and standing out. That's what Jesus did. He didn't stand up and show out. And if you only know what he said, that's generally what happens. You can tell somebody they're going to hell. You can do all these things and say all these things, but when they watch your life, it will speak way more volumes than anything else. So it's the challenge to really realize that all of us, even myself, even yourself, are a product of something. And as we change our trajectory, as we begin to say, you know what, yeah, this is where I come from, but this is what I'm moving forward. Because along the way, there's this Jewish carpenter who saw something in me and said, come follow me. That's where I want to go. I want to go to that best version because when I spend time with him, he speaks about me differently. He forgives me. He challenges me. He gives me opportunities that I don't think I'm ready for. When you begin to see that in your own life, then it changes whether you're secular or spiritual, wherever you're at, you begin to treat people with that same value. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about discipline, obedience. You brought the discipline up earlier. I think obedience sort of goes hand in hand with that as an entrepreneur, as a business person. I think we don't truly understand, and I'm going to anchor the question. I'm going to anchor it against this. I don't think entrepreneurs, particularly in food and beverage, realize how much influence we have over the world around us. We deal with material things. We have lots of ingredients, lots of different farms we have buy from, even though we may not buy from them directly. We deal with our employees on a daily basis. We are leaders in our communities. We do a lot, okay? Food and beverage, people eat at our restaurants, people get delivery from us. We touch more humans than anyone else on a daily basis. Someone can prove me wrong in some way, shape, or form. I doubt it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
So when it comes to what I'm going to attach this question to why I'm asking Anthony, and I want him to answer for everyone, I also just want to connect the dots for the audience. We, as entrepreneurs, have the ability to pasture or shepherd our flock and have godly influence on them and arm them in our daily lives. So when by the time they get to Sunday, they're being supercharged.
Yeah.
If that's what they choose. If not, we still have the ability to grow them through work being worship in the way that we oversee them and grow them and give them more. And by more, I mean knowledge. I mean the ability to grow, the ability to gain their own freedom and understanding and relationship with Christ. So I just want to anchor that. So let's talk about discipline and obedience and definitely reflect back on what I just said, if you'd like to.
Yeah. Discipline is not easy. I think that's the first thing we have to say. Being in the military for 21 years, that's the very first lesson that they attempt to teach you is discipline and obedience when you go to boot camp. They're trying to undo the mindsets that you had before, undo your bad habits and give you a baseline of where it's at. And I wonder quite often if if we did that in everyday life, one of the things I experienced is in my travels in the military and beyond, Israel requires every one of their kids to join the military at the moment they graduate high school for 2 years. I think it's 2 or 4. But every one of their college age kids, when they turn 18, they join the military for 2 years and they decide to stay if they want or get back out. But think about that from a perspective of a culture of a nation to establish a discipline and a heart for obedience, which really sets them up no matter what they do, whether it's food industry, whether it's staying in the military, whatever it may be, as discipline being your guide. You walk in with desire to be disciplined in whatever you do. And then if you think about food industry, with now you have an audience. That's one thing I think about in the food industry is you are catering to somebody. You're giving something to somebody. So you have an audience that's going to judge your food, judge your serviceability, whatever it may be. Wouldn't you want to do that to the best of your ability? To stand out, really, discipline and obedience to something bigger, which in our cause, when we're Christians, it's not the discipline and obedience to ourself, our pocketbook, our success, but it is really to the people we're called to. And you carry that over to the food industry. You're called to the people you're serving. So what am I doing? How is my disciplines in my own life to give the best product available, to give the best food available, to get the best ingredients available? Because I know if I do that, impact will be made instead of just taking the easy answer. And because you can get by without being disciplined, and you can be just like all the rest. But you notice when somebody's disciplined, when somebody's doing something different, when somebody's obedient to a cause, to a why, then it changes not only what they do, but how they do it. And I think that's the important piece of it. That's the call in all of us is we could all be entrepreneurs. We could go do something in the way somebody else is doing it. But in order to stand out, at the core of everything we do has to be a why. And then your disciplines are built off of that why. That's the thing that doesn't shift. A bad reaction from a customer doesn't change your why. It refocuses to say, man, did I miss it for a moment? Or maybe that customer is just, I deal with this sometimes in ministry, is I wish everybody had great motives, but that's not true. Somebody can come to me like, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. So then I have to check back into my why. Did I stay the course? Because sometimes I just didn't give them what they wanted when they wanted it, but maybe that's based on their own expectations, but not on their own needs. And it's in that place where I'm saying, you know what? I stay in the course. This is what I'm guided by. And you know what? Maybe I didn't give you the thing you wanted. Maybe I gave you a scripture that stepped on your toes a little bit. So I didn't give you what you wanted, but I gave you what you needed. And I'm okay with that because I know down deep the why is I'm not following my desires. I'm not trying to follow my pocketbook. I'm following a God that wants the best for you. So if that's my discipline to stay in that, then that's what leads and guides me.
Yeah, I want to talk about this a little bit. I'm going to give my own scenario, but I just want to talk about the emphasis here on this also, what you just said. Number one, like something I've learned from my own transitioning many years in one industry, and then all of a sudden not knowing what to do as an entrepreneur, starting all over again, relationships fall apart. It's just a crazy scenario when God really just strips it all down. But one of the things I'll call it is, since I used the jar reference, he emptied my jar. There was not much. I felt empty inside, right? Totally empty. But one of the things I learned is that in dumping it, while I felt useless, anything I had learned, what am I going to do with all these skills? What am I going to do now? I have no opportunities. I can't figure out what I'm going to do. Does God even like me? There's these crazy things that we think about, and why now? Why right now? What is it trying to go on? But I think the most important thing is, at first the jar has to be empty. Okay. And I didn't understand this, the surrender, the discipline, the obedience. Why is it important? You have to make sure that this is the first thing that enters your jar, which is the Holy Spirit. Okay. Yeah. Then everything else can fill out the jar. Okay, but not if that's not first, trying to squeeze it into a jar that has not many cracks left or whatever in the way that I did it before. I was trying to squeeze it in a jar that had no room for it. I was squeezing in every little crack and crevice I could because I had the dedication. I'm loyal. I have a lot of obedience also, but the part of the obedience and discipline that I learned is that I had to also listen to the way that the obedience and discipline is truly done. And that meant I had to be willing to go to zero for God.
Yeah.
And that meant emotionally to allow that Holy Spirit in. And when I did that, God then weirdly started stacking the skills back in, the ones I needed for Him. The rest that I didn't need, the sin, the whatever, some of them are still lingering for sure. They're going to be there forever. I'm an imperfect human. I got to deal with them and work my way through to make amends constantly, but the other part is there's a weird thing that a lot of things that were holding me back, a lot of the big things that I didn't know were big are gone as my jar is being refilled. And the abundance in my life because of that is much different than what we were just talking about. The money, the profit, all that stuff takes on a different meaning. Geez, going to seminary also gave me this perspective. In business, we're constantly balancing how much profit we keep, how much profit we make, how much do we need to spread to the employees, the shareholders, business, what becomes greedy, how much all of a sudden are we now just talking about money only and not the core values of the business because we just asked all those questions as we grow. Okay. The thing that I like about this, and I think it is a focus, is churches often deal with the same thing. They have donations coming in. There's a financial struggle. And I think like if the church looks like they're doing too well, it's looked bad upon. If they're not doing well enough, then they can, then that's a good thing because they're living like God. That's not, I think profit and the church's struggle with this whole thing that there's a sense that the church needs to be poor. It doesn't necessarily need to be poor. If it's poor, it can't do its job in today's world. So there's some of that I think I just wanted to tie in just because it's part of our conversation, that the discipline and obedience has a lot to do with also where we're starting from. If we're starting from a good place, that discipline and obedience can get us a lot farther faster. Go ahead. Even if we have to start all over again, but go ahead.
Well, I think it all comes back to, Jesus said, I came that you would have life and have it more abundantly. But it was never for us to just walk around and have abundant life. It was for us to do something with it. Think back to that discipline. What's the what do you have that discipline for? Why do you gain that audience for? What are you doing with it? You could look at me. I have a big audience. I have this many followers on Facebook. I have this many people in my congregation. I have this much money in our bank account. But God's standing there like, yeah, but what are you going to do with it? Because I think at the end of the day, it's what we're defined by. A church that's actively doing something, making a difference. Sure, there will be people that always say, hey, look how much money they have. But if you're doing it, less people will ask that because it's not the money sitting in the bank. They're going to ask people like, man, look how much money they have. And people are like, yeah, but look what they're doing with it. It's not about padding their pockets and putting the pastor in this kind of car and them having all those things. It's about making an impact with it, which goes back to, the several scriptures in the Bible that talks about 1 Peter 3, I forget which scripture it is, but he talks about those who will revel in your good behavior. And I think it's that place of when your heart, your why is to make a difference with what you have. That's when God can trust you with more. That's when he's going to expand your platform because your character and your desire and your heart for him can hold it up. Like if your pursuit is the platform, which is where I was early on in my ministry, there would have come a point where my character would not have been able to support it. And it would have crumbled because that would have been my foundation. So as he can trust us with more, if he can trust you with $1, you can make a difference with $1. That's when he can trust you with more. And I don't think we have enough of those. I think we have sadly enough, we have a lot of churches and people whose pursuit have been the success and the prosperity and not been, what can I do with this? So it does present a space for people to say, why do you have all this money? Why do you have this big $1 million home and all these cars, yet there's homeless in your community? What's your pursuit? Is it your success, or is it to make a difference in those around you? Because you know what, even in our church, we have homeless in our community. And somebody come to me and said, how do you have this and you're not doing anything with the homeless? Well, let me show you what we are doing with what we have. And what's coming in is taking care of what's going out. There's not an excess of money in the bank account. There's not an excess in anybody's pocket. Difference is being made. This is the area we've been put in, that we're being trusted. However, one of the commitments we made as a church is we send money to other organizations that are doing things that we're not, because I realized along the way, I'm not called to do everything, but what I'm called to do, I want to be excellent at. And I also want to equip and connect people who are doing something different for his good, that I can either finance them with people, money, time, whatever it may be, to help them be. So I think that's the piece of it is, you have an audience, you have finances, whatever it may be, in business, in life, in church. What are we doing with the impact we've been given?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think we come face to face with it as we get older. The why, the when, the shiny ball things with success come and go. They don't mean as much. They lose their value. So we keep buying more, whatever it is. Sometimes it's car collection, sometimes it's whatever it is. But I find it interesting because, one of the individuals that I really started paying attention to over the last 2.5, 3 years, as I'm sort of coming out of a shell shock, what I would call, is an Adam Sandler's way of life, and sort of the give back, the humility, the generosity, the investment in the future in the ways that he can, whether it's his time, whether it's his money, but it's also in a way of humility, of not doing it. And it's really not that I have a problem with the way anyone else is doing it. It's just more or less that it's just caught my attention personally in terms of the impact he's able to have with it. Like, how much more work is he able to do God's work? I think of like Ryan Reynolds. This is just a different scenario, and I'm taking God out of this equation a little bit, but going to bring him into it. He had a dream of doing business and being a billionaire and having global impact and influence on the world. But he understood that acting would take a long time to get there. So he used acting, which he loved to do, as a stepping stone to leverage him into buying a soccer team, to leverage him into a production company, to leverage him into owning Mint, which he then used his own name and brand to leverage. Why do I think that that's important? Because you can do the same thing here, what we're talking about here. We're talking about God's given us a vehicle. Mine's food. Okay, someone else's, it may be the church itself or a church itself. I use the because in the grander scale of the sense of the word. So, I think that we have the ability to have that influence. And when it comes to money, if we're using it to have good, create jobs, influence in a good way, there's an intent to it, and we're not a slave to it. I think there's a lot there, and we have to share it, but not in a way that is giving so much away that entitles people, gives them too much comfort. And I know that's hard for everyone to hear, but it is sort of our responsibility as entrepreneurs also to make sure we don't give so much away that we rob people of the suffering that they need to experience from God.
Yeah. In other words, you don't become their God. That's,
yes.
When you
Bingo.
trust him and lean into what he's called you to do, then you'll say yes at the right times. And sometimes you'll say no at the right times. So that's a hard place to be, is because you do feel like you got to help everybody. But, a story that I often think about is when Jesus healed the lame man beside the pool of Bethesda. That was a pool. And I got to go to Israel 2 years ago. You begin to think about it. That pool is where all the lame gathered to find money and hopes of healing from the waters or whatever it may be. And Jesus only healed one person there. So he walked through a group of lame people and healed one person. Why did he do that? Because that person had the ability, had the the wherewithal when he healed him to pick his mat up on the Sabbath and go walking. Like that was the moment he ministered on the Sabbath that who just healed him. And then a chapter later, he gets brought into, the religious elite and answers questions about Jesus. Not everybody would have done that, but he went to the one who was going to make a difference with what he had been given. And, as you were talking, it comes back to two words. Success is a word that's often used in business and life and all the things. And that's our pursuit. The pursuit in my life has drastically changed through this season of the undoing, and all of it is I'm not looking for success anymore. I'm looking for access. First, I'm looking for access to him, which I know requires me seeking him. And the Bible says, if you seek, you will find. Knock and it will be open. Ask and you shall receive. So if I'm looking and seeking and knocking for access to him, it will be given to me, but it requires an action by myself. The second part of that is if I'm seeking access, whether it be with you in the food industry, me in ministry and life, or even in our homes to our kids, if I'm seeking access to somebody, then what am I doing to take care of the access I've been given? Like, oh, I want my wife to give me access to this. Well, are you going to injure her and wound her in that place, or are you going to care for her in that place? For you in the food industry, I want access into this consumer. What are you going to do in that? Are you going to give them a bad product that just puts money in your pocket? Like, you think about all the issues we're seeing now as, RFK Jr. is beginning to challenge some of the FDA things and like that. I'm sure you could talk to this. But there's been so many people in this industry that's been given access to a consumer that has not took care of them, has taken the easy road, has gotten the quick dollar, and people have been hurt in the process of it. I've seen this in ministry. People have taken the easy road in ministry and preached the simple thing, but people have been hurt in the process. So what are we doing with the access we've been given? So then our pursuit is, man, I want access because that's a place of trust, but then that also puts the onus on me that I'm held accountable for the access I've been given.
I love it. We took up a lot of time. I appreciate you coming on, Anthony. I would love to have you come on and do another episode because I obviously have a lot more questions, and I find it very impactful and helpful for the audience. But I'll ask it this way. You, in your journey with Christ and you're building a better relationship with him, how do you stay in discipline and obedience with him?
I just learned to listen every minute of every day. I was raised to believe that you got to be in the prayer closet 2 hours or in the word every time. What I've learned is to listen in the moments, just the most simplest of time. I've learned that he's always talking. I've learned to listen, whether it's in my car and I've got ESPN radio on and I'm listening to a press conference with some coach, and that coach will say something, and it's in that moment that God sparks a thought in me and it begins to take me down this process. I've learned to spend time with him, not in need or want, but just in the car, turn the radio off and listen. I don't think we do that enough. I think the discipline sometimes can distract us from the relation, because we can get good at checking the boxes. The rich young ruler is a perfect example. He came to Jesus and he said, I do all the things. I do all the commandments. What would you have me do? And Jesus said, to give away all your money and your titles. And the rich young ruler walked away grieved. What was he really asking him? He's not saying that you can't have money and titles to follow him. He's saying, walk away from the things that you've done and trust me in the areas that you have. Like, give up everything that you've earned, because then you remove your name from it, and now to follow me. And I think that's...
Yeah, go ahead. No, and the greater lesson there is we all have something like that in our lives, whether we know it or not. It's right in front of us and we're enslaved to it. Pornography is a more drastic example, but as men, we go through these things. And as... so anything that enslaves us in that way that we aren't willing to give up, well, it's got a bind on us greater than God.
Yeah. So I think the greatest discipline is to listen and know what voice you're listening to. My kiddos, when I say something, I could be in a room full of kids. If I say something, a command, the only ones that may respond would be my kids, because they know my voice and they trust my voice. So spending time with him in your word, in the Bible, in prayer, in worship, spending time around other believers, other kids that know their dad, learning his voice, because that's the moment you'll realize that when you hear that negative voice come in, I just don't believe that the voice of God is ever negative. Why would he speak to us in that way? Why would he demean us? Galatians, it says the Holy Spirit does not put us to shame. So he doesn't speak in terms of shame. He doesn't speak in terms of comparison, comparing us to somebody else and saying, why can't you be more like Anthony? Why can't you be more like all these different things, and begin to compare you out in this place. Like, he genuinely calls you to a place of relationship. And that is to follow him, to know more about him, and to make a difference in the world. So that's the place. I think people just need to learn to listen more, spend time with him, whatever way it is. If you do it a little bit, give him a little bit more. If you don't know where to start, just open the word. Just begin to spend time in prayer. And you don't have to have a list of things that you talk about, but it's just, man, I'm just thankful that I have a God who listens, who loves me even when I'm a mess, and challenges me to grow. I'm thankful for the impact you continue to give me. And I pray that you would give me the ability to see the impact that it can have for your good, that I would never get to a place where it's about me, because the moment it is, then it will always be limited.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it. I mean, I want to support you in any way that I can. Is there a place to support you where you are? I want to understand all that, or help the audience with that as well, because I think you're an abundant resource. And I think anyone suffering from what I'll call suffering from trying to figure out how to bring more core values, Christian values into your businesses, whether you're at the beginning or you're in a family business in a third generation, there's still ways that it can happen. Like, I've learned a lot about those type of things just by being around Anthony. So that's why, Anthony, I just want to put it out there. I think there's a greater calling, and I think it is back to what you said, that segue, that bridge that doesn't need to be a bridge anymore. We can connect the land, but between what we used to call secular and spiritual, it is the same thing. And especially as entrepreneurs and people that are truly faithful, we get to whatever job we're doing, no matter what it is a chance to live in a Christian way. So, I mean, I don't even know where I was going, but if you have any information or could tell us where they might be able to find you, that'd be awesome.
100%. Yeah. I'm the lead pastor at Greenbrier Community Church here in Chesapeake, Virginia. So you can reach me via email at leadpastor@gogcc.org. You can find me on Instagram, A_Hart757. I encourage you, reach out if you're struggling personally and just need somebody to listen. I'm here for that. Opportunities for me to speak, I don't seek those out, but I've had opportunities to speak in businesses and conferences and things like that. And anything I can do to share my journey with somebody to help them grow, that's the important thing. My Facebook is just Anthony Hart, but what you'll find is I'm just a dude that God has put me in positions and open doors for me to share his goodness and his grace in my mess.
Wow, I appreciate all of it. Thank you for coming on the show, Anthony. And lastly, is there anything that you feel might help the audience today, or that you feel God is just asking you to share out loud right now, short, long, or whatever? I just want to make sure I give you that time, because it's very powerful who you are and the way God works through you.
The greatest lesson I learned in ministry, and I think it's across the board, is to, with my family, I was exampled that ministry came first and foremost, and almost became my relationship with God. That's what was taught in a lot of ways. But in that down undoing season, at the core of everything, God said, the strength of your family will determine the strength of your ministry. And I think that's for anybody. I think the strength of your family will determine the strength of your business. I think the strength of your family will determine the strength of your impact. That's God-given access. So what are you doing in your marriage? What are you doing with your kids to build them up, to have your home be a place of rest, that when you walk in those doors, it's not depleting you, tearing you down, having you on your heels all the time, but really a place where you can rest, be restored, to wake up the next morning and hit business, to hit ministry, to hit life head on, because you had that place of rest. So that's the one thing I would say, focus in on. If your marriage is in trouble, invest time and energy to get it back to where it should be. If your kids are struggling, sit at a table and listen to their story. Help them walk this journey out. Your home is important.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that big time. Everyone in the audience, thank you guys for listening in. I love you guys. If you like what you heard and you think someone needs to hear it, please share it. Whatever episode platform you're on, just hit share, like, comment if you like the episode. What we're trying to do here is basically give entrepreneurs the weapons that they're seeking to bring the values that they want into their businesses. That's why if you guys go back to the Peter Elias episodes, the one right before this about the food trailer that hit black ice and flipped the food trailer over on a highway, and their business was struggling, and they just prayed about it, and God gave them solutions, not only that time, but multiple times. So it's worth going back and listening to the episode before this one as well as a lot of them that we're doing this year, because I'm focusing on that. I have a lot of questions about bringing spirituality into businesses, particularly into food, and how do you do it? And everyone fears losing customers. I get it, but stay tuned. There's a lot of solutions and advice and individuals that we'll have here, and networking events and sort of summits and stuff we can do. And I'm giving away as much of the information as I can as free to you guys, also on Gorilla Brave or through the podcast. Like, all of it, we're just giving it away, and the entrepreneurs are on here giving back for what they've been given, so this is an important resource that everyone was asking for. Again, every episode has the notes in it, and every episode has timestamps in it now with, the quick version to get back to parts of episodes if you wanted to re-listen, or there was a nugget or piece of information that you guys want to get back to. So we've done all that. And then, you guys have that as a resource as well, since I know everyone is asking for this to become more referenceable, meaning go back, extrapolate the information out of the episodes, cross-reference with information. And then I've also used academic information to cross-reference that to support any of the information, so we all know it's legit and there's truth in all of it. So my goal is also with a capital T moving forward as we do all this, and I get you guys educational information and things like that. So thank you guys. I love you guys. Thank you, Anthony. We're out.